Hello. Now, today is Tuesday, it's Holy Week. You're probably going to be watching this on Good Friday, and that's the day we remember Jesus' death on the cross. And our reading today, Psalm 53, is a great psalm to read to help us to understand, to get a bit of godly perspective on the death of Jesus on the cross, which we celebrate on Good Friday. You know, the idea that Christians celebrate the death of their key figure and that we call the death of our key figure good. These are strange ideas, but why is it good and why do we celebrate? Well, Psalm 53 actually helps us to understand this. So, thanks for tuning in. Let's get stuck into it. Now, if you were reading Psalm 53 today and you thought, hey, this sounds familiar. Well, it's not just because you've probably read Psalm 53 before. It sounds familiar because Psalm 14 and Psalm 53 are basically the exact same psalm. There's a couple of tiny little word differences in there, but basically this song is on the playlist twice, which is kind of bizarre. There are no other psalms that are repeated in this playlist, but Psalm 15 gets 2 runs. So why is this song on the playlist twice? Why is this featured 2 times in the Psalter? Well, let's have a look at it and see why. This psalm is about human evil. You know, David begins the psalm by saying, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God." And while we might think, oh, this is a psalm about atheists, if you keep reading, you see this isn't about atheists alone. This is about all humans. Because he goes on to say, "They are corrupt and their deeds are vile. There is no one who does good. The Lord looks down from heaven on all mankind to see if there is anyone who understands, any who seeks God." And the assessment is all have turned away. All have become corrupt. There is no one who does good, not even one. How's that for an assessment of humanity? Now, the question is, why is this 2 times in the Psalter? And I think when you look at Psalm 51, followed by Psalm 52, you get to make sense of what Psalm 53 is doing here. Because remember, the Psalms, all 150 of them, they come in order. And if you're going to understand the meaning of them, you have to understand them in their context. This isn't like a playlist you can just press shuffle on, because some of the meaning gets lost if you take them out of their order. So, let's read Psalm 51 in light of Psalm 53 in light of Psalm 51 and 52. Remember Psalm 52. Last week we looked at this one. It's about Doeg. He is an Edomite. He's Saul's chief shepherd, and he slaughters 85 priests and then kills all of their wives and children as well. This is an awful evil act. You know, you put this down this end as the kind of worst of humanity. That's Psalm 52. And yet Psalm 51, it's the Psalm of David where he confesses his adultery with Bathsheba. Now let's just remember who David is for a moment. He is the righteous king of Israel. He is kind of like the high point of the Old Testament when it comes to godliness. And he is the righteous one, the Messiah of the whole book of Psalms. And yet Psalm 51 is this horrible episode of his poor decisions, and then rationalization, and then further poor decisions, and an attempt to cover up, which ultimately spirals downward into David executing one of his best soldiers. It's an awful act of evil, and it starts with a righteous man making a poor decision, probably motivated by his laziness, right? So you have these 2, Psalm 51 followed by Psalm 52. You got the best of humanity, flawed. And then you've got the worst of humanity, obviously flawed. And then you have Psalm 53. And we've pressed repeat on this song from Psalm 14 to remind us that actually the assessment is all humanity. You know, so whether you're down this end or whether you're up this end, all humanity are like this. No one is good, not even one. This is the Christian idea of, I guess, fallen human condition, what some have called the original sin, the fact that sin is part of all of us, evil is a part of all of us. And it is not, I would say, a popular assessment of humanity, but I do think it is an honest assessment of humanity. G.K. Chesterton, who was a 20th century writer and a Christian, he famously said that modern people have rejected original sin, and then they have been surprised to find human beings behaving badly, which I just think is a hilarious quote, but I think it's true. We've gotten rid of this whole idea that evil is in all of us, and then we hear stories about Jeffrey Epstein and the atrocities of war, and we're just utterly shocked. Perhaps there is something to this idea of original sin. And if you understand this idea that humanity is fallen, the best of us are fallen as well as the worst of us, then that helps you to make sense of what is happening at the cross of Christ. Let's go to Romans to make a little bit more sense of this. See, in Paul's letter to the Romans, he borrows from the Psalms, and he actually borrows some of the lines from Psalm 53. The ones that talk about how we are all evil. No one is good, not even one. His assessment at the end of it all is in chapter 3 of Romans, where he says, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And so it's not that we have all sinned, it's that we have all sinned against God. David makes this point in his Psalm 51 as well. Against you and you only have I sinned, he says. And we might read this psalm and we think, David, what about Uriah? What about Bathsheba? Or what about the nation of Israel? What about Bathsheba's unborn child? What about David's former wife? There's lots of horizontal people that David sins against, but David is saying ultimately his sin is an affront to God himself. And that is true of all human sin. It is against God. And the question is, well, how is God going to respond to humanity in this sinful, obnoxious state? And the utter surprise and delight is that he responds with love. Because he comes to humanity in human flesh, and ultimately he goes on to die for them, motivated by his love for them. Paul comes back to this in Romans chapter 5, when he's summarizing his argument so far. He says in Romans 5, 6, 7, 8, you see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Remember, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. Christ dies for that fool. Verse 7, very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. You see, Psalm 53 is a description of the humanity that Jesus went to the cross for. It's not humanity at their best. It's humanity in its honest state. Warts and all, When God was deciding to send Jesus to the cross, he wasn't trying to conjure up a picture of humanity that made him feel like you're worth dying for. He was remembering humanity at its worst. And he still went to the cross. Do you see? It's with our failings and our evil and our hidden sins and our godless hearts and our self-centeredness, that is who Jesus has in his heart when he goes to face death on the cross for us. Which means God's love, he loves you frankly when you're unlovable. And the cross of Christ is a reminder of that. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Paul says in his letter to Timothy, Christ died for sinners, of whom I am the worst. And I think that's a good memory verse to take into Good Friday. Christ died for sinners, of whom I am the worst. But he loves. So hopefully this is a chance for you to celebrate the Good Friday. I'm actually not going to finish with a prayer today. What I'd like you to do is to click on a link that I'm going to have on the screen now that'll play Isaac Watts' wonderful hymn, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, and pray and praise God for what he has done in Jesus on the cross. Have a good day.